Drop those tired, gloomy thoughts and come alive. That is the message that we'd like to discuss this morning. You know, people have different ideas of what the church is all about. I like to think it's a hospital where any person injured or wounded, either in body, mind, or soul, may come for healing, for therapy, for renewal. It's also an energy station where people who are run down, tired, discouraged, and disconsolate may get an injection of power. It's an enthusiasm center where when you've got a down attitude towards yourself and towards other people and toward the world, you can come and get yourself rejuvenated. But you see, the trouble is,
what the fuck?
So many of us suffer from tired, gloomy, desultory thoughts, and the life force is reduced in us. Now, of course, one reason that we're thus suffering is because we've been inoculated over a long time now with tired and gloomy thoughts. There's been a good deal of agitation about pollution, the pollution of the rivers, the pollution of the sea, the pollution of the air, and all of this is very bad, and there should be a great attack on it to straighten it out and fix it up. But this is as nothing compared with the pollution of thought that has been engendered in this country. Years ago, we had in this neighborhood a wonderful radio commentator whose name I will not mention because I don't know whether he's still living or not, but he's no longer on the air. He had a great voice. It was a unique voice. There's no voice that I've heard of on the air for years equal to his. It was the voice of a genius. But every time he'd start out a radio program, he'd say, "There's bad news tonight." But he was an objective reporter. He wasn't trying to push a viewpoint. He was merely telling it as it is. But that was his trademark. There's bad news tonight. Now, his successors have improved on him. They not only come up with bad news, but they're pushing various viewpoints. I wonder, you know, how the country survives with people telling you there's bad news all the time. I was down and made a speech in a place called the King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, the other day, where I could look out and see Valley Forge over there. Now, that was the worst winter they say they ever had in Pennsylvania. And I suppose that every night somebody'd come on some kind of a communication system and say, "It's bad news tonight." Then they came up to the Civil War. Battle of Bull Run. The Federal troops had 125,000 soldiers, and the Southerners had about 16,000 under Stonewall Jackson. And he just messed up the Federal troops like nobody's business. I'm sure somebody must have come on the air that night and said, "Bad news tonight." Well, I've got a little bad news here. I copied it out of a paper. Here's what it says. "It's a gloomy moment in the history of our country. Not in the lifetime of most men has there been so much grave and deep apprehension. Never has the future seemed so incalculable. as at this time. The domestic economic situation is in chaos. Our dollar is weak throughout the world. Prices are so high as to be utterly impossible. The political cauldron seethes and bubbles with uncertainty. Russia hangs as usual like a cloud, dark and silent upon the horizon. It's a terrible moment of our troubles. No man can see the end. Well, that was written in Harper's Weekly in October 1857. Isn't it a wonder that the country has survived all this bad news business? Well, you know, our ancestors, they were tougher people than we are. They had a faith that was really substantial, and they were able to separate the temporary from the eternal. They knew that humanity goes forward by difficulty, by pain, and by suffering, by bad news. But they also knew that if you stuck it out, if you kept your faith in God, if you did your part as a citizen and as a Christian, no matter how many dark clouds they were, the sun would ultimately shine. So, get rid of those tired, gloomy thoughts and come alive. Get that pollution out of the mind. The world is good. People are good. The future is good. And that's not saying there isn't a lot of bad news along with it. But humanity has gone forward by victory over bad news. If you ask me, that's the history of the Christian church. It was born in bad news. It has grown great in bad news. It'll be bigger now because it has to deal with a bad news situation. So we're all inoculated with it. Well, you've come into a place this morning which is rooted in the essence of time. And here you are in the timeless, not the time equation. Well, you say, I know, I'm guilty. I've taken on all these tired, gloomy thoughts. And I'd like to get rid of them. And I'd like to come alive. How do you do it? Well, may I say, first of all, a very important and effective technique is constantly to practice being underwhelmed, not overwhelmed. Everybody's overwhelmed. Oh, this overwhelms me. This situation overwhelms me. And our country's overwhelmed with problems, taxes, unemployment, everything. Well, now, where do you get being overwhelmed? All you do is create additional tension. So the idea is to be underwhelmed and not be emotional. De-emotionalize. I think one of the great troubles with contemporary life is we've got so many super emotionalized people. The antidote to that is to think rather than to be emotional. Any problem in this world can be solved if a person will keep cool and think. That's all in the world you have to do, just think and pray. And prayer is a form of thought, whereby you get the divine intelligence into your own intelligence. The human mind will never function when it is hot. Only when it is cool, rational, dispassionate, underwhelmed can the human mind get answers to difficulties. So don't get into a tizzy. Don't be in a dither. Don't emotionalize. Think. I was in a hotel not long ago where I was to speak at a luncheon. And they told me that they had 910 people signed up for this luncheon, which was a pretty good crowd, you might say. I was sitting in the manager's office of the hotel with the manager, who's an old friend of mine, when the assistant manager came rushing in. He was perspiring. And he said, "Oh, Mr. So-and-so, we are in a very bad situation." Well, the manager said, "Jim, sit down and tell me about the bad situation." He said, "We've got 1,020 people, and we've only prepared for 910. What will we do?" He said, "You can't get any more in the ballroom than that." Now, don't get the idea they were all there because I was making a speech. This just happened to be a well-organized affair. Well, he said, "I'll tell you what you do, Bill," or whatever his name was. He said, "Those tables are so far apart now, you can put them together 6 inches further. And that'll give you so much space. And then there's one little place where you can put some tables on the outside." Well, he said, "Maybe we can do that, but what about the food? We haven't got the food for 1,015 or 20 people, whatever it was." He said, "What are you serving?" Well, he said, "We're serving roast beef." Well, he said, "All in the world you need to do is to set the gauge on that thing and slice it 1/4 of an inch thinner." But he said, "I know, but look, we're serving peas." Well, he said, "How many peas are you giving to a person?" He said, "We count out 100 peas to every person." He says, "Make it 90 and you're in." But he said, "We haven't got enough rolls. We have to put rolls around every plate." "Oh, no, you don't." He says, "You pass the rolls. Half of them won't take a roll and you're in." And finally, the assistant manager calmed down and wiped the perspiration from his brow and went out. And the manager sat back, put his feet up on the desk, and he said, "You know something? One of the secrets of this hotel business is to know how to be calm in a crisis. Never let anything work you up. There's always an answer to everything if you will think." And for my benefit, he added, "and pray." And I said, "You pray, don't you?" He said, "I pray about my job every day of the world." Well, I went to the luncheon. And the meat wasn't all that bad. And I'd have been glad to settle for 40 of the peas they served at. Underwhelmed. Now, the world isn't going to go to pieces, nor is the United States, nor is your business, nor is your life. It never has, and it never will. If you get rid of those old, tired, gloomy thoughts and just start thinking. In peace and in confidence shall be your strength. So says Isaiah. Confidence and quietness shall be your strength. But everybody's so excited about everything, all worked up. I was in San Francisco speaking on one of those talk shows. And I don't like those talk shows because you never know what kind of a question you're going to get, and you never know what kind of an answer you're going to give. So I was on there, and a man came on, and he said, "Dr. Peale, is that you?" I said, "Yes, sir, that's right." He says, "You sure it's you?" I said, "Well, as far as I know, it's me." He said, "You're always talking about positive thinking, aren't you?" I said, "Well, not always. I refer to it occasionally." Well, he said, "I don't buy that positive thinking business. Don't buy it at all." He said, You got a problem with me that you can't get around. You might as well fold up on this problem because you can't handle it." Well, I said, "If that's the case, why go any further with it if you've got me licked with it?" Well, he said, I want to get your answer. And I said, "Here it is. I'm 52 years of age. I am out of a job. And you know yourself that no man 52 years of age can get a job. And he said, furthermore, I haven't got any brains. And secondly, I haven't had any good experience. And third, I haven't had any education, and nobody likes me." Now, he said, "What are you going to do about that?" Well, I said, "How do you know you haven't any brains?" Well, he said, "When I was young, I was told I didn't have any brains. The brains in the family all went to my brother." I said, "Who told you?" He said, "My brother." Well, I said, "You sound to me like you have brains." And then I said, "You telling me that nobody 52 can get a job?" I said, "I hired a man last week, 59 years old. You can get a job if you get underwhelmed. The trouble with you is you're overwhelmed." I said, "Who did you say didn't like you?" He said, "Nobody likes me." I said, "Do you like yourself?" He said, "I never thought about that." I said, "If you'll get to liking yourself as a child of God, you will realize that you have what it takes to get a job and do a job." And I said, "You've got to love your neighbor as yourself. You can't love your neighbor unless you do love yourself. So you better start loving yourself." And finally, he said, well, you pray for me." I said, "Now you're talking. I'll pray for you, and you pray for yourself." He said, "Is that what you call positive thinking?" I said, "No, that's just faith in yourself and faith in the good God, but it certainly isn't negative thinking." Well, you know something? About 6 weeks after that, I had a note from this man that he had a job. He said it isn't much of a job, but believe me, by the time I get through with it, I'll make a terrific job out of it. That's the way to talk. Take what you can get. Do the best you can with it and step it up until it becomes something really great. You've got more negative talking, miserable, defeated, unhappy, down in the mouth people all around everywhere. It isn't necessary to be that way, either about yourself or about the country or about the day and age in which you live. So I'd like to suggest that you walk out of this church today and you say to your wife, "You know something, honey, I am underwhelmed from now on." Of course, she'll probably have a heart attack and die on the spot, but she will die happy. Underwhelmed. That's the first technique in dropping tired, gloomy thoughts. And the second one seems like that it isn't consistent with the first, but it is. But if it isn't, so what? The second point is to get excited about life. But you say, "What do you mean? I can't turn on excitement. If you're excited, you're excited. If you're not excited, you're not excited. You can't go to a drugstore and buy a bottle of excitement." Well, now listen here. If you're not excited, you can be excited. And how do you get to be excited if you aren't excited? You act as if you are excited. This is one of the greatest psychological principles ever enunciated. It was first mentioned in this country by William James, who at one time was professor of anatomy, psychology, and philosophy at Harvard. Body, mind, and soul, you might say. And he taught the as-if principle. That is to say, if you're full of fear and you want to be full of courage, you act courageously. And in due course you will be courageous. If you're full of hate, you don't want to be that way. You want to love people. Act as if you were loving. And presently, in the very nature of the psychology of the human being, you begin to take on loving aspects. And if you're not excited, you act as if you were excited. You go out and you say, isn't this a terrific day? Look at that sky. Look at those beautiful clouds. Feel that beautiful rain on my face. Isn't it great? You'll become excited. Now, that's what the church, in my opinion, is designed to do. People come dragging into church. They come in desultory. They come in antagonistic. They come in hostile, even sometimes. What's the preacher's job if he's any good at all? And I don't claim to be any good, but if he's any good at all, he should send them out of the church full of excitement about God, about Jesus Christ, about themselves, about other people, about their world, their day and generation. Get excited. Well, that reminds me of a friend of mine. Way back, I was very young. This man was 25 years my senior, maybe more. He was a professor at Syracuse University. His name was Hugh Tilrow. He taught public speaking. He was a dean. He was a great speaker. And he got me as a pastor of a church up there. I didn't know who he was. I was sitting in the pulpit with him first day. And he was introducing me. I leaned over and I said, Professor, what do you teach in the university? He said, public speaking. And I said, oh my. He said, don't let me bother you. I've made speeches for so long I know how nerve-wracking it is. I'm not back here judging you, I'm your friend. He said, tell the people out in front what you know about Jesus Christ and tell them to be enthusiastic and excited. So I tried to do that best I could. And I loved this man. And one night I got a telephone call that he'd had a stroke. So I went up to see him. He was lying in bed, couldn't raise his hand. His speech was a little twisted, and he was like a great big oak tree that had fallen down. He said, I can't hunt anymore. He was a great hunter. I can't fish anymore. He was a great fisherman. He said, I can't teach anymore. Can't speak anymore. And I said, I have a date tomorrow night down in a certain place in Pennsylvania at a commencement. And I want you to go down there and substitute for me. I said, what do you want me to tell him, Professor? Tell him to love the Lord and be enthusiastic and excited. Tell them that excitement sweeps every resistance before it. Tell them to love the world, to love people. Tell them to get in there and be excited. Oh, I could hardly stand it to see him lying there like that. And I went out and walked up and down Walnut Park, weeping like a baby at this great man, my friend, having fallen. I went down there that night, and I preached excitement, sober thought, enthusiasm. The two sections that I've mentioned here about underwhelm and excitement are consistent because some great figure said, the world belongs to the enthusiast who can keep cool. He never becomes gloomy. He never loses his faith. He always believes in the possibilities inherent in human nature. He always believes in the greatness of himself. He believes in the future of mankind. He's a believer, an enthusiast, an excited person who doesn't emotionalize, however, but keeps cool. So whenever I think of my old friend lying there, destroyed physically, but not mentally or spiritually, his advice comes back to me. In the name of God, tell the people that they're great souls and that they can be greater people and that life is good. And it can be greater by overcoming the bad news in quietness and in confidence shall be your strength. Our Heavenly Father, we had a message here that we wanted to articulate. That is, communicate. And we feel this message very deeply in our own heart. If we haven't transmitted it to the people here, won't you transmit it? Because where we can't communicate, you can. So just let everybody know that they're a child of God and that they're greater than they think and that they can make the world greater than they ever have thought before. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.